Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed yesterday. We've got another session starting right now. It's a good fraud session for the anti-fraud track, harnessing new technology, transforming the fight against insurance fraud. And we are lucky enough today, we have Ian Laughlin. Ian is the Director of Data Science at NICB, the National Insurance Crime Bureau. So I'm very excited for him to be here. He's got the expertise on this, so this should be a really great presentation. So thank you for being here, Ian, and I'll go ahead and kick it over to you.
All right, thank you. There might be a little bit of issues with the mics, but we're good. So thank you, I appreciate it. So I am Ian Laughlin, as Greg said, Director of Data Science at the National Insurance Crime Bureau. The purpose of the National Insurance Crime Bureau is to lead the intelligence-driven efforts to combat and prevent insurance fraud. So that, particularly the prevention side of things, frames a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. A little bit about myself before we go into the quick agenda here I've supported the FBI as a contractor for 5.5 years, and then I started doing this job over here. About a year is where I've been. I have a background in data science, and before that was explosive ordnance disposal for the military for 10 years. So we're going to talk about 3 major topics. The first is the changing threat, and that is really on how the threat is and has and will continue to change. The second side is the identification and detection of the insurance fraud. For phrasing, identification is the things that we don't know, right? So that's the new stuff. And then detection is the things that we do know. And then the last topic, which is the part that I like, is prevention. Prevention is really the key. That is the one that we will see the largest benefits in anything that we do. As the saying goes, right, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. All the companies that are out there that say that they can detect and identify and stop fraud, that's the cure side. All right, so large language models is the first thing, right? AI has been helping fraudsters for years, but only with the release of generative AI models, such as ChatGPT is probably the one you guys are most familiar with. There's Midjourney, which is an image generation model, and Speechify, it's a voice generation model. But with the introduction of these things, the barrier to entry has lowered. That's been the key thing here. Prior to large language models, fraud schemes just used people. So if I wanted to expand the amount of fraud that I was doing, I had to recruit more and more people to doing it. Sometimes these people are in foreign countries. Sometimes they were temp workers. They were hired under false circumstances. Sometimes they were the fraudsters themselves, willing participants, that sort of thing, right? And that caused problems for detecting them because you don't know whether or not somebody is necessarily innocent or has been kind of caught into the realm of things, or is a willing participant. So the amount of information you can get out of them sometimes varies. And so the bottleneck is in how much fraud, or the bottleneck in how much fraud could take place was really driven by the number of accomplices that a fraudster could get on their side. And so we can do the same thing and target that, but that doesn't really work when we're using generative intelligence. And because it relied on humans, fraud perpetrated using this was easier to detect. The problem is that particularly with large language models, is that we intentionally designed these models to fool us, to substitute for human writing. And then we're surprised when it's being used to fool us and substitute for human writing. So I got a couple of examples. This is just a sample scam email. I don't know if you can read it. Hopefully you can. There's a bunch of errors with it, but this is a scam email that I didn't get, but it was done through It's one of the ones that was done by by a foreign writer. And you can tell that it was done by a foreign writer. There's a lot of kind of conceptual errors in this, and so it's pretty easy to detect, right? It's got Gaddafi's name wrong. It's stating that money that they want to give you or to move out is in Benin, but then add some filler language. But it does look like that it's an apparent government email, right? It says moa.gov.my. So they put that gov in there to try and make it seem like it is a legitimate email. And then they're asking for you to send a response to them by a separate email for various reasons. But this is pretty easy to detect that it's a scam, it's fraud. It's not insurance focused, but it's the easiest one. This is an email that I received the other day, and it's generated by a large language model. And this one is much more targeted. It uses an address that I used to live at. It has my name. It threatens me. And it's generated by large language models and some automated scraping plus some data spillage. This one in particular is very well written in the sense that it sounds very casual. It sounds like I'm here, I see what you're doing. They make vague threats. But this is one that I actually got. And the interesting thing about this is that you can tell it's faked because that's not a photo of the actual place that I was living. There's some other errors too, but that's the biggest one. But the tone of this is much harder to detect. It sounds like it's an actual person, and it doesn't pop on the AI detectors. But I've also received 4 of these emails in the last 6 months, so it's the same email. They just come from different emails, so it's interesting. But that's the whole point, right? Is that these models have been around, or these models are being used to perpetuate fraud, absolutely. But it's the exact same thing, methodology-wise, that we were having before the advent of generative AI models. It's just faster and easier. So image manipulation is the next side, right? We did text manipulation in terms of large language models. This is image manipulation, where we're talking about images themselves. So image generation models are fed huge amounts of photos and trained on those images. Same thing like with text. You feed it huge amounts of text. And then when asked to create a new image, they kind of create a new image using the parts and pieces of the original images. So they take, an eye from here, they take a lips from here, and they interpolate them and smooth the edges. And that is how your image generation models work. It's using basically the same technologies that we've used for the last 170 years. It's just faster, cheaper, and easier. Deepfaked images are a little different. They are also trained on huge amounts of photos, but a deepfaked image really starts with a real photo and only manipulates a portion of that photo. And so most of the time when you're doing a deepfaked image, the only portion of the deepfaked image is the face. And the face can be real or it can be artificially generated, so they're just overlaying it as well. A simple example of this that we'll show you in a second is the various filters that you have on your phones, on your social media apps. Snapchat's Time Machine is a fantastic one where you can show some of this stuff. And another term for deepfake, where it's used in legal purposes, is augmented reality. I'm sure a lot of people have used augmented reality. I know Amazon has it these days for how does this piece look in my bedroom or whatever. They also have some of these, some of the fashion companies you're able to swap out your clothes utilizing that. That's the same technology. So much like every other technology, a hammer is a hammer. It can be used for good or bad. Same thing here. The generative AI can be used for both good and bad. And so I'll go back into a little bit of history here. This photo was created in 1865. All right, show of hands, is this photo real or is it fake? Who thinks it's real? All of you think it's fake? Okay, why do you think it's fake then, since I had 5 people raise their hands? The floor? The floor is real. Also intentional. So this is a composite photo, right? They did 2 major things here. The first is that they took Lincoln's head and moved it onto his body and mirrored it. The body is actually of John Calhoun. The other minor detail that they did was, if you look at the original photo compared to the old photo, or to the second photo, the original photo, the text on the bills that are on the desk changed. This was done, like I said, in 1865. It fooled the Library of Congress for over 100 years. The picture on the left, by the way, as a fun fact, was used on the $5 bill. If that looks kind of familiar, the head does. So this is the point, right? We've been using this technology. It's been around really since the advent of photography itself. Here's another example. Same photos. This also come from the Library of Congress. The big composite photo is and was thought to be real. It was created in 1902 out of the 3 photos on the left-hand side. The composite was actually created 40 years after the original photos were taken, and it also took about 100 years for them to figure it out. They ended up releasing a report in 2008 about this because a researcher asked questions in 2007. There are some minor details here where, if you look at the composite, the questions that rose was that the uniform was wrong for the time, namely that the picture shows 1 star, he was a 3-star at the time, so like minor details. And it was some researcher who loves their job that found this detail. But it's interesting that they did this. They actually ended up doing the research and found those 3 originals. And then, of course, right, Snapchat's time machine, you can show your age with a click of a slider. It's pretty cool, and it's being used right now by Hollywood and other video producers to either age or de-age a person. That allows them to expand their kind of working life, so to speak. This, by the way, is available on your phone. It takes just a couple of seconds to do, and that doesn't even touch the more powerful stuff that is available on like your new Pixels out there, where with your new Google Pixel, you can swap out things. So this is a real photo. Which of the horses is fake? The one on the left, the one that you can see the whole side profile of. Yes, that's the left. Okay, or the one on the right. Who thinks the left? Okay, and the one on the right. Who thinks they're both real? And I'm just fooling you. So these are actually 2 photos, again, composite, but you can scale. Like you can outline an article or outline an item, and you can scale it, you can remove it, you can shift it left and right using Google Photos. So if you have a Pixel, I think it's a brand new Pixel, they released it, they released the software August 22nd, so it's about a month now. But it's fascinating that we're able to do this, and it makes it very hard to detect, which is why we should prevent it, but we're not yet. All right, video manipulation. is much the same thing as image generation, right? Image manipulation. Videos are simply just a bunch of images that are slightly different each other, right? And you can show movement through playing those. That's why footage is called footage, is because it came in reels of feet of film. And it's changed over the years as well, right? We used to go with huge sets where we weren't actually trying to, we weren't manipulating the images themselves, we were just manipulating your perception of the image. And then we went to green screens where it would be manipulated in post-production, and then now there's LED walls that are being used to do a lot of the work there. The Martian, if you guys have seen that, The Martian was largely green screen on the back, but one of the issues that they had while filming particularly the outdoor scenes, because those were filmed in the deserts of Jordan, was that they wanted to remove the blues and the blue tints out of the sky and the reflection of the sand. So they developed a specific model called Earth to Mars to swap that out. And as well as the visor, and it's only improving since then. So the next slide is going to be a video as soon as it gets pulled up. And that should take a few seconds, but we'll talk about it. What it is, wherever the The first part's not great, but here we go.
How's your head?
Oh, good. Fine.
Oh, I've been so worried about you ever since you ran off the other night. Are you okay? Oh, it's hurting. I'm sorry, I have to go. Isn't he a dreamboat?
Doc, she didn't even look at him.
This is more serious than I thought. Apparently your mother is amorously infatuated with you instead of your father.
Whoa, wait a minute. Doc, are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me?
Precisely.
Whoa, this is heavy.
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
What?
The only way we're going to get those two to successfully mate is if they are alone together. So you've got to get your father and mother to interact in some sort of social...
Well, what, you mean like a date?
Right.
Well, what kind of date? I don't know. What do kids do in the 50s?
Well, they're your parents. You must know them. What are their common interests? What do they like to do together?
Nothing.
All right. So, that was deepfaked, right? That was Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr. in Back to the Future. That was somebody who does it for a hobby, right? He enjoys doing this work. He does not do it professionally. He does it for a hobby. And I don't know about you, but it looked really good, right? Like, I kind of want to see the rest. I want to go back and watch Back to the Future. So that's the point, right? Is we've been using it. Sometimes it's for good, sometimes it's for bad. The interesting parts of generative AI is how it's changed the customer experience, right? Customers are now expecting their insurance experience to be almost entirely online, particularly if they're below the age of 50. And for a significant portion of the people they want above 50, they also want it to be online because it's easy and convenient for them. And so insurance companies are often using generative AI models to converse through chatbots for them. However, it increases the motivation for fraud, right? Because if I have a local insurance agent that I talk to on a regular basis, I feel bad about scamming him or her. But if I am scamming the faceless entity, that is the insurance company, the infamous they, it's fine, right? There's no personal face behind it. You're just scamming a faceless entity. The other problem with it being online, entirely online, is that it lowers the bar for scamming because the industry currently doesn't really have a good method to detect if the person behind the claim, or even the claim itself, is real without putting boots on ground a lot of times. And so it's a struggle back and forth between profitability and accuracy, much like everything else. And the advent of desk SIUs is also the same problem, right? It's brought a lot of advantages, But the problem is that it's computer-based, and so again, there's that much lower in-person presence. We'll talk about a couple of other circumstances later, but the gist of those is that when people were asked directly by an actual person, they told the truth. But they weren't telling the truth when they submitted the claims and that sort of stuff. The other problem with desk SIUs is that there is a higher level of required data quality and data fidelity, right? We just need more granularity, we need more specificity. Instead of the accident being at, you know, the 300 block of West 22nd Street, where you, the local agent, know where that's at, now we're looking more for like, where is the precise latitude and longitude? Because it makes it easier to find some of these things. And then the big issue, which is really the regulator problem, is that there's a higher risk of confirmation bias. If you're using a machine learning model to say, hey, we think that this claim is fraud, a lot of times the desk SIUs are going to go, cool, it's fraud, because the model said so and I agree. There's been a study out there that actually says that the combination of generative AI and humans is less inventive than either one by themselves. I'm not sure how they judge the inventiveness of an AI model, but it was pretty interesting. This is the big part about how the threat has changed, is the fact that now you can do it all together, right? So before you would have a phishing scheme, this is an automated phishing scheme, right? Where you have a server side and the response generator kicks out all these things, and it's fine. But the integration of the response generator with generative AI, now you can take the response that you're getting where you ask it a question, it will create the text, and it will actually say, oh, well, I need a picture to go along with this text. And so it'll kick it out to the context text generator, which will then generate an image that goes with it, and then that'll all combine back in and send you a response where it looks legitimate, right? It doesn't take very long to create an image. It doesn't, you could easily pass it off as, oh, I have to upload the photo from my phone, whatever. I'll go take a picture. It's pretty easy to do. And instead of just relying on a bank of potential responses, it now has access to a much kind of larger bank of answers because it contains vastly more information. So it allows it to personalize and target and tailor its responses to a huge degree. I don't know if anyone has used any of the large language models, but you can ask it for different phrasing, like you can ask it to talk like a pirate, which is fun. You can ask it to be more aggressive, and it will regenerate the same letter just a little bit more aggressively. I used it here in a little bit. And it allows, but it allows you to target your audience a lot better. So normally when given the option of good, fast, and cheap, you can only pick two. Well, now you can kind of get all three with the AI tools that are in people's hands. Some would say that the reason why we are being able to get cheap is because it's subsidized by venture capitalism. That's probably true to a certain extent, but I can also download these open source models and run them on my home computer, and it's fine. So that's not a significant barrier to entry. And that's the point, right? Like the barrier to entry for people to use this and scam is lower. It doesn't require you to spend months or years or decades, right, learning how to use Photoshop, which has been around since 93, I think, right? It doesn't require you to take a lot of care in manipulating actual photos. It doesn't require you to spend hours learning how to do this stuff and to manipulate video. Speech generation, by the way, has been around since the 1950s. It's a thing. And that's the thing, is that now it's just gotten so much better, particularly in recent times, that it's easier to fool people. So, how do we identify and detect? One is with a lot more data, right? We're already kind of in a surveillance capitalism state, right? Every time you interact with any of these companies online, they are collecting data about you, they are collecting your IP address, they are collecting user behaviors, how your mouse moves across the screen for some of these. And so we can do things with that data and look at like anomaly detection. So how is your user behavior differ when you're committing insurance fraud versus when you're not? Is it automated? Is it not? You can detect these things. You can also look at the claims frequencies. These are just some examples of anomaly detection models that we've built. Some geographic and temporal patterns. It's actually pretty interesting. You can watch the dispersion of a fraud scheme across the United States as it moves through networks. And of course, network analysis itself. And then you can look at the historical data and say, oh, well, how have things changed, and is this a problem? It's an anomaly, right? It's changed from the historical problem. The issue with that is that we live in an ever-changing world, and so things change. Whether or not the anomaly that was detected is a legitimate fraud or not has to be done by a person in most cases. We can also do, particularly with this fraudulent behavior, forecasting, right? What this is the practice of using data and statistical models to predict the future behaviors and actions of individuals or groups. Psychology on a scientific scale, right? So we collect the data, we have the historical data from past sources, their past behaviors of other users, demographic information where appropriate, social media activity, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of ethical considerations that have to be taken place in with this. The privacy concerns, data security, and there's a lot of realm for potential biases within the data and the algorithms. So you have to watch out for it. But we can do stuff if we can predict your behavior remotely accurately. And I'll go into that in a second. And then the other big one, this is actually pretty cool. You can use a large language model to compare two documents or compare multiple documents across each other to summarize the differences between them. And it can catch differences that would indicate a pattern of fraud is occurring. However, it can't tell the source of the inconsistencies, right? This inconsistency could be legitimate human error, as I'll go into with a study done by the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud. There is a person, he got into an accident, legitimate accident, had $33,000 in medical bills. Insurance company didn't pay out the full $33,000, and his girlfriend, who is a medical coder, helped him commit insurance fraud so that way he could get the remaining amount. She got caught because she messed up on the medical coding. So, but it's just a documentation inconsistency, and you can start comparing when you start getting a lot of this data. You can compare that across everything. And then, of course, organized crime detection. NICB identified over 2,000 organized criminal networks just last year, and our unique position among the insurance carriers allows us to have faster and earlier detection of the criminal networks, as well as seeing how they evolve over time. And seeing who is a legitimate person in the network, an actual fraudster versus kind of a, someone that's gotten involved in it as happenstance. And it allows us to work to disrupt the networks early in the process until waiting they've become large enough, which leads to prevention. So prevention is really, right, how do crime comes from means, motive, and opportunity. There's a couple of other factors as well, but mostly this is it, right? So how do we target the means, motive, and opportunity? Well, the first thing is we can unlearn generative AI models, right? I don't know if anyone knew that, but you can make your AI models so that way they just don't know certain things. It's how we know it's not actual intelligence is because you can remove knowledge from it. This is just a representation of how it works for image generation. It works also for video generation and large language models, and it can be done, right? And it's something that we're starting to explore, is working with the major companies to develop a framework to reduce the efficacy of their large language models and image generation models in insurance fraud. So it'll be pretty cool. Watermarking is another thing that can be done, and this is something that absolutely needs to be regulated. We need to regulate having watermarking because right now the companies have the technical ability to do it. This comes from a scientific paper that shows how it can be done for large language models in particular. And it's not being done by any of the companies because that gives them a competitive advantage, right? Because unfortunately, if you watermark your text, like you can watermark and identify all of your text that's generated with it, especially over quantities. This is not a solution, but it's just one step. And again, there's legitimate uses. So do you want the ability to detect whether or not this copywriting is generated by a large language model or not? That's a valid point, which is the reason why it needs to be regulated. Is because there's legitimate arguments about why we shouldn't watermark things. It's up to you guys to figure out whether or not it's worth the risk-benefit to do it. Targeted messaging is also really fast, and it's really cool. So if we identify who is committing insurance fraud and what their behaviors are when they're interacting with our systems online, we can actually start sending them messages before they have committed insurance fraud, right? We can send them a targeted message. This is a fairly threatening one, right? That says, in essence, we see you, we have security systems, we've detected this, we will prosecute. You could face, criminal charges, fines, imprisonment, or civil penalties. And this has been shown to work at drastically higher rates than increasing punishment levels. And this is really simple and really easy to do. The cost here is pretty low. And it doesn't just push the crime to another area like is a common complaint, right? If we reduce crime over here, it goes up there. It's not a zero-sum game like that. This actually just eliminates the crime altogether because you're reducing their motivation. You're increasing the perception that they are going to be caught, and that is key in reducing people's crime rates. But you can identify all this stuff, and it's great. And so you can actually tell them when they're still in the legal territory to not do it and to knock off what they're thinking about doing before they go into the illegal territory. You can also use AI to determine what's the most effective way to respond and target certain types of insurance fraud. Catalytic converter test, right? There's been a lot of laws that have been published, passed recently about catalytic converter tests and how we're dealing with that issue. So we're watching it right now to determine kind of what impact the legislation has compared to, quite simply, the prices of the value of the metals that are inside of it, which is what was the big driver of catalytic converter tests, is the fact that prices went up 600%, and now they've gone back down. But you can actually start compare legislation between localities to start trying to identify the most impactful portion. Is it the fact that Illinois requires the scrap metal dealers to take photos and keep records of anybody who comes in with catalytic converter? Is it that they're required to provide proof of the VIN that the vehicle came from and ownership of that VIN? Is it something else? Is it the fact that they're required to pay by check, so they have to mail it to you, they can't pay it right then? So we can talk about these things, and we can use it to actually project the next thing that's coming around. Like, is it going to be batteries? I don't know. Is it going to be copper out of EVs? I don't know. But we can start talking now about how we can project the future to make effective and efficient legislation. Predictive urban planning is the other big part, right? Or is another big part. It allows for the prevention of losses entirely. There is huge benefits for this. There is a ranch in Babcock. It's called Babcock Ranch in Florida. It's 18,000 acres. It's larger than the island of Manhattan. They spent a couple of tens of millions extra when they were developing it. It's a master planned community, or an HOA, right? But it's a master planned community where they've laid out all the roads, all the infrastructure, all the parks, everything. And they spent 30 million or so extra in doing some of these things. What they did is they buried all the infrastructure, they put more land towards drainage and towards water retention, so that way they could shuttle water out, and made it more climate resilient, which was good because just a few years ago, Hurricane Ian in 2022 went right over it and caused hundreds of millions of damage to the surrounding area and very, very, very little damage to Babcock Ranch. Not a single person lost access to water or power or sewer, and no one was flooded. So the damage that was done was a couple of street signs were knocked over and a couple of palm trees came down. So you had maybe 100,000, if we're being generous, in damages compared to hundreds of millions surrounding it. And it only cost them an extra $30 million. This is one area that regulated change, I think, is also needed because there are only a few major home builders in the United States, D.R. Horton, Lennar, KB Homes. I'm not calling out any of them in particular. They're just examples, like big companies. But the localities really should start looking at the whole holistic picture and say, okay, well, what do we need to do to design better neighborhoods that reduce crime rates, that reduce opportunities for fraud, that reduce the actual accidents and issues that people face, while achieving the goals that the community has. So, but a lot of the models right now don't build in like climate risk as part of it. And that's one of the major reasons why insurance companies are losing a lot of money is because they haven't properly assessed climate risk. Well, we can reduce that now by building better. And then finally, right, root cause analysis. This is the catch-all. The Coalition Against Insurance Fraud study, it was called the WHOMI study. It came out March of this year. And what it was, they talked about a bunch of things. A couple of things was a survey was issued. One of the questions was like, how likely are you to commit insurance fraud? The younger you are, the more likely you are to commit insurance fraud. And by younger, I mean under the age of 50. So I'm not saying this is a Gen Z problem, right? This is almost everybody problem. And even over the age of 50, the ratio was still a quarter of them were willing to commit insurance fraud. And then that also paired neatly with what's your perception of the insurance companies, right? The younger you are, the worse your perception of the insurance companies was, which tells me, with a couple of other details, is that the insurance companies kind of have an image problem, right? And how do we, the insurance industry, improve our relationships with consumers so that way they feel like they're not being scammed as much, and so they are less likely to scam us. And then they also went into 5 case studies, and I'll talk about 2 of them real quick because they're extremely relevant. The others were mixed or intentional, but 2 of them, again, one was the guy got into an accident. He had $33,000 in medical bills. They paid him 11 grand. And even though it was a legitimate accident, legitimate medical bills, they only paid him 11. They paid him a third. What I think they were trying to do is saying, okay, well, look, we know that it's probably not actually $33,000. We want you to negotiate that bill. But they never mentioned it. They didn't say anything to him about it, as near as I can tell. It was just kind of expected, but that expectation wasn't communicated. What I think should have been done from, again, trying to improve the relationship standard is the insurance company gets that bill. They see $33,000. They spend the $250, call up the person, call up the doctor's offices and be like, hey, what do we actually owe you? Let's negotiate. And do that negotiation for them, because then you go back to the person who is just in an accident, who shouldn't have to be doing those things, and say, hey, look, we got you, you're taken care of, we've paid your bill, we hope you feel better. And it improves that, and it would have prevented that cycle. The other of the 5 that I want to talk about is a guy had gotten insurance. He thought it was the same insurance that he had gotten from as his mom. His mom had the same kind of insurance from the same company. His mom was covered, where if she rented a rental car and got into an accident, that vehicle was covered because that had happened to her. And so he thought he was covered as well for the same circumstances. He got into an accident with a rental car. He was not covered, and he absolutely committed fraud, just like the other one did. and submitted a fake declarations page and got caught, rightfully so. The problem I have, though, is that I asked that question of myself and my own insurance. Is my insurance cover that circumstance? I looked at my declarations page, it's not on there. So I called my insurance company, and it took them 10 minutes to find that information. Maybe it could have been more clear and say on the declarations page, you're specifically covered for all these things, but also you're specifically not covered for these things. That's a UI and UX thing that we can actually project out and figure out if that works. But according to that study, assuming proportions hold true, which they probably won't, right? But assuming they do, that puts 40% of insurance fraud really is kind of all either wholly or in part caused by the insurance industry themselves. And if you're looking at $310 billion of insurance fraud a year, 40% is a really big number. And so that's what we really should need or should start doing, is looking at how we can break the cycle. Is it things that regulations can fix? Is it the insurance industry that can fix? Is it the prosecutorial side that needs to change things? What is it? But we need to start having these conversations because insurance costs have gotten very expensive. And it's driving people just not be insured, which is not the answer. That causes a lot of other long-term problems that we as a society really can't face. But I'll stop there, and I'll see if anyone has any questions. Any questions about anything? No, I'm perfect? Yes, ma'am.
So when you look at the people who are committing this fraud, and you showed like people coming in from like the dark web, like what percentage of that are they coming in and they're using, say, my insurance policy to get money compared to I am doing insurance fraud?
We don't have a great grasp on that. About whether or not you're the victim in the insurance fraud is really what this comes down to, as I understand what you're asking, right? Okay. We don't have a great answer on that. It kind of varies, and part of the issue of why we don't have a great answer on it is because a lot of times the accidents are real. You have suffered harm, you have suffered loss, but then it's also kind of gotten expanded with like a staged accident where you were kind of trapped into getting into an accident, but then they also stacked a bunch of other people along into the car with them. And so now your insurance is out the money for a legitimate accident that has some false pretenses to it. So drawing the line, where to draw that line, is difficult. So I don't have a great answer. I wish I did, though.
So it's just not people like using your insurance policy and creating a claim. It's you've created a claim and they're trying to get more off of that claim by adding things to it.
Yes, that's one way. Or the entire accident could be fake and you could be a willing participant. Drawing the line and identifying that difference between them is difficult, and that's why we have SIUs. He'll bring the mics.
It feels like pictures are no longer going to be proof of accidents or damage. Like, what are insurance companies supposed to be using?
I would recommend securing the photos from the point of origin onward. There's a lot of talk about image metadata and everything else, which is the data about your photo, so when it was taken, where it was taken. Unfortunately, that can also be faked pretty easily, right? But what can't be faked is where you lock the image and you hash it and in essence, I hate using this term, but you kind of create a blockchain for it, where it's an immutable evidence ledger, and you start treating pictures and video and everything as evidence, and you start cryptographically securing it from the point of origin onward. And by point of origin is generally on your phone, right? So that way you can start identifying, are fraudsters using the phones to create this stuff? Are fraudsters using their computers and then shifting it over to the phones? You can start telling these differences if you start securing your evidence, which is really what this is, from the point of origin onward. So that would be my recommendation, is start trying to treat this as evidence rather than just pictures. But it's a difficult problem. I'm sure that there's other options out there, but that's the first one I would go with, just to see how well it would work. Anything else? Yes, sir.
For regulators who are handling complaint processing of consumer issues, do you have any advice for those insurance regulators to maybe recognize triggers of fraudulent activity or indicators of fraudulent activity that would suggest this file needs to be moved to an SIU instead of handled as a consumer complaint?
Not really. Not that I want to talk about publicly. We can talk offline about that, but it kind of varies, and it depends on what side the fraud is or potential fraud is. Anecdotally, like I've heard from a couple of other regulators that deal with customer complaints, for example, is that they will get a customer complaint, they'll go over to the insurance company, they will ask them questions, and then suddenly the complaint's been resolved because the insurance company took care of it. Why that was an issue in the first place, I don't know. Is that fraud? Is it not fraud? Is it, I don't know. Where the fraud lies, that's another question, right? Is it that they just felt like, oh, well, this is a low enough claim, it's $1,500, it's not worth fighting? Maybe. I don't know. It's a business decision that I don't want to get into. But there are some indications. A lot of it kind of comes down to what looks off, though. All right, we have a few minutes before lunch still. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. So I do need to fill this time if anyone has any other questions.
Is there a big push for for your type of information that you're providing us today from insurance companies? Are they interested in hearing this, and are you doing that within the industry?
Which part? The prevention side?
Educating.
Yes.
Okay.
To both answers.
Oh, sorry.
So are you also seeing third-party crime? You know, like on television, you see all these, if you're in a car accident, are you seeing things that are like third-party fraud because those people who are like the ambulance chasers are
Yes.
also...
Yes, absolutely. There are lawyers that have been caught that are the nexus for a lot of these criminal organizations. There are repair shops that have been involved. There are other service providers that are involved. And sometimes they're the actual fraudsters themselves, like with medical billing, right? You go to the doctor, and the doctor just adds a couple of line items onto your bill, and you're like, well, I'm not quite sure we did that, but honestly, medical insurance is confusing. I don't know what they did. So I'll just write it off and call it good. Same thing, right? It's called billing for services not rendered. So yes, absolutely, we're seeing third-party fraud. If I had percentages, that I have a target. No, not firm percentages. It's kind of range of percentage. Depending on what you look at, it can be anywhere from 3 to 15%. There's been various research done, particularly out of the European Union, that again shows wildly varying numbers. So I don't want to speak about any particular numbers because it's too wildly varied at this time. We need more data before we come to an actual number. All righty. Any other questions, or do you guys want to go to lunch? Sounds like lunch it is. All righty. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you.